I see a structure over there, but I can't tell what it is.
Gwen Trice is standing in what looks like a big open field in northeastern Oregon's Wallowa County.
This area here is, as you can see, it's raised up a bit. This is where the track was laid.
The place where Gwen is standing was once one of the largest towns in the county. It had a post office, hotel, roundhouse, and many homes. 9 decades later, a broken-down railroad trestle and one building are the only remaining evidence of a place called Maxville.
The African Americans, they all stayed on this side of the track. And then the majority of the town of Maxville was back over here.
Gwen was born and raised in LeGrand, Oregon in the 1960s and 70s. Hers was one of the few Black families who lived in LeGrand at the time. Her father was 56 years old when she was born, and as an adult, she wanted to learn more about what brought him to Oregon. She discovered that when he was 26, he and his father traveled from Arkansas in a boxcar to live and work in the logging town of Maxville.
My dad may have been standing right at this very spot, and this was his life. And I get to be in that same space and just maybe be a little closer to the man that I really didn't know till later in his life.
From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Maxville was a company town. The Missouri-based Bowman-Hicks lumber company created it in 1923 to house loggers and their families. The company recruited experienced loggers, including immigrants, Native Americans, and Black men from southern states. This was at a time when Oregon's constitution explicitly banned Black people from the state. Housing and schools were segregated in Maxville, but the workforce was integrated. Even after the town essentially closed down in 1933, some Black families, like Gwen's, remained in Oregon.
I think probably the best years were really like first grade or second grade. And I think that was before I really kind of knew that there was a difference between me and the other kids that I grew up with.
In the mid-1960s, she was one of the only Black kids at Greenwood Elementary School in LeGrand, Oregon.
So I had maybe one or two friends growing up. I had a friend that we used to go horseback riding. So the parents would sit down and have that conversation that it was okay for me to spend the night. And it was really about that my mom knew that the parents understood that maybe there might be backlash.
Gwen said that she and her siblings weren't welcome in the homes of some of their white classmates.
They would say, my mommy said, I can't play with the That would happen on occasion. Or they just out and out would say, well, I can play with you outside, but you can't come in our house.
She chose to leave Eastern Oregon after high school. Gwen lived and worked in Seattle for 30 years before moving back to Wallowa County. She often attended an annual gathering put on by the Wallowa band of the Nez Perce tribe called the Tomkalix Celebration. At one of these gatherings in the early 2000s, someone suggested that she visit the site of the former town of Promise, which was 7 miles from what used to be Maxville.
And that's the first time I heard that, you should go up to that Promise reunion. Your people are from up there. That was the opening statement. And I just thought, well, I don't even know you. What do you know about my people? What does that look like? And why would that be in Wallowa County?
But she was curious enough to make the trip to Promise to meet some of the people who had moved there after Maxville closed down.
The first day that I was there and they knew I was coming, they had a booklet put together of all the pieces of the Black history of the town of Maxville, which was 7 miles away, and that my father and grandfather and grandmother and cousins and all my family were the first Blacks in the county that came in boxcars as experienced loggers. And before that, before 2003, I didn't know my dad was a logger. And that absolutely changed everything.
Gwen got to talk to people who remembered Maxville and her father, Lafayette, better known as Lucky Trice.
My dad, to me, as a little kid, was 10 feet tall, and everyone knew him.
She pieced together parts of his past that she had never known before, and it gave her a new perspective on her own life.
And so it was really transformative for me to understand another facet of why we were born and raised up in the northeast tip of the state.
She started recording interviews with people in Promise.
There's so many stories of the people that lived during the time of Maxville. And when I first discovered it, it was really critical that I capture those stories right then. A lot of the people, the primary people that I interviewed were in their 90s, in their mid and late 90s, and they still had their stories. So I did a lot of traveling throughout the state, a lot of interviews in the county, and I went to Texas for one of the last voices of the African-American loggers that was still living.
Ruth Carmen told Gwen how Lucky had saved her husband's life.
He always liked Mr. Trice. They logged together, and a snag fell over and hit my husband on the back. He fell over onto the tank on the tractor, and it cut his back up, but didn't break anything. And Lucky picked him up and packed him. I don't know, ran with him quite a ways to get him where they could take him to the doctor.
So I knew that my father was loved and he was respected. And I still hear stories of him, of men coming up and saying, we really loved and respected your father. It had so much value to my heart and my spirit that I could give my son a legacy and my grandson a legacy, and that I could root them into a place that I was rooted in and didn't know.
It turns out she wasn't alone. Maxville's history was not widely known outside of Eastern Oregon.
I went to the educational institutes around the Pacific Northwest of people that were experts in the field, and no one knew anything about Black loggers in this region.
It's safe to say that what she learned in Promise changed Gwen's life. She kept collecting and documenting information about this little-known part of Oregon's history. She moved to the Eastern Oregon city of Enterprise, and in 2008, she founded the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center in Joseph, Oregon. She's devoted herself to collecting and telling stories about this multiracial timber town.
What I thought was going to be my story is really the community's story. History is really valuable to the community here, and they are really proud of their history.
Coming up after a break, we'll learn what a recent archaeological dig revealed about what life was like in Maxville. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll brighten your Monday morning a little bit with something new and exciting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPBphoto, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on what Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about some of the first Black Oregonians and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. That is the beauty of public media, my friends. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to Maxville.
The history of Oregon is built on a series of stories that are important and true, but they haven't all been told, and we are trying to fill in those gaps to tell a true history and a proper history and a socially important history of Oregon.
Mark Tveskov is a professor of anthropology at Southern Oregon University. He's particularly interested in lesser-known parts of the state's history. He heard about Maxville from Gwen Trice when the two of them served on a state committee together.
It's such a crucial untold story. I mean, the story of logging in the Pacific Northwest defines our identities in many ways, but have the idea that there were Black people from the South as part of that in rural areas of Oregon, that's not the way that the narrative has traditionally been told. And in fact, the presence of Latino, Black, Chinese, people of many different identities out there in the woods were systematically erased.
Maxville was in a remote area of northeastern Oregon where winters are long and harsh. It was pretty isolated until the railroad came in. That railroad was built specifically to transport large logs from the ponderosa pine and fir trees that grew there. A lumber company bought the land that had formerly been homesteads.
In the 1920s, when Maxville was founded by the Bowman-Hicks lumber company, Oregon was a heavily white state. There were laws, segregation laws, that literally made it illegal to be Black in Oregon. But the power of capitalism was such that a national corporation could bring Black families, skilled Black loggers from the American South into the woods of rural Oregon to harvest trees.
In the summer of 2024, Mark led a dig to try to uncover artifacts specifically from Black families who had lived in Maxville. The project was a partnership between Southern Oregon University, Eastern Oregon University, and the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center. The dig itself came after a long process of research to try to pinpoint exactly where the Black community was located in Maxville.
After 3 years of careful survey, document research, oral history research, and map research, this is the first time that we've actually excavated holes in the ground to ground truth some of that information.
Part of the challenge was that many of the houses in the segregated town were not built to last.
And in the case of the Black families at Maxville, they lived in railroad houses. They were sometimes called skid houses, like they were placed on a railroad car. They were brought into Maxville, lifted off the railroad car, and placed. And we have at least one photograph of that neighborhood. That was one of our clues. And that was their housing. It was modular, stamped out, mass-produced housing. And they lived in that. Other parts of the neighborhood lived in that. And then in contrast to that, the white families lived in carefully constructed houses, the remains of which are still here.
The Great Depression was devastating for the timber industry. The Bowman-Hicks company shut down its logging operation in Maxville in 1933. A few people lingered, but it was essentially a ghost town. In 1946, a huge winter storm destroyed almost all of the remaining structures.
It's very obvious at Maxville where the white families lived during the heyday of the Bowman-Hicks company, but for a variety of factors, the location of where the Black families lived was lost and hidden.
When they started, Mark and his team actually didn't know for sure that they were digging in the right spot. Rory Becker from Eastern Oregon University helped them take an educated guess. He used remote sensing technologies to pinpoint a location based on the information Gwen Trice gathered through oral histories.
And that allowed us to pinpoint our best educated guess. And then this past summer, we tested that guess, and we managed to find one of the homes of one of the Black logging families at Maxville.
What they found offered small clues to what life was like in this rugged town over 100 years ago.
They didn't have electricity, so there's fragments of lantern glass everywhere. We find food here at this company town. The company was bringing in canned goods. So we have sardine cans, different kinds of cans reflecting different foodstuffs. But also in this environment here in Oregon, they were hunting. So we have elk bone, duck, and goose, and we could see them butchering and eating those things in the archaeological site.
Trice remembers her father hunting and fishing a lot when she was growing up in LeGrand.
I was raised on elk and venison and pheasant and crappie that my dad would fish for.
She was on site for the dig.
For me, it made me so exciting because it brings me closer to the experience of my family that was there. My father, grandfather, grandmother, my uncles and cousins that were part of it. It helps me to really bring that alive, that experience that they had.
The archaeologists unearthed a safety pin that could have been from a baby's diaper, rivets and buttons that provided information about the clothing people wore. For Mark Tveskov, these fragments of daily life help to tell a more complete story of this place and the people who inhabited it.
For example, in the archaeological excavations of the Black family's house here at Maxville, we have recovered fragments of vinyl records And we believe we have the technology to extract the music off that vinyl records to discover what they're listening to. We also have found decorative material from their clothing, like snaps from fancy ladies' dresses, and also glass beads. And we don't know for sure if this is what it is, but this was the 1920s, and all of our minds go right to beautiful flapper dresses, right? And we know that from the oral history of Maxville that they had dances, and that the Charleston was danced. And, to think about how human spirit and the color of our lives can resist those structures of capitalism, of industrialization, of dehumanization. And again, I think that's a really important lesson for the present day.
This dig helped to bring Maxville's history alive in a new way. But for Gwen, there will always be some unanswered questions.
I don't know anything about my grandfather. I'd like to know about who he was. I'd like to know how the journey was in a boxcar from Pine Bluff, Arkansas to Eastern Oregon in the wintertime. And was he afraid? And I'd like for him to give me advice on if he could see what I do, is just to tell me, is it good, Dad?
This work is not only good, it's transformative. Gwen has uncovered a history that is layered and complex. Ultimately, it's a story about humanity, about what it takes to live and work in a harsh environment, and how that forces people to focus on what they have in common.
Because in places like Promise, in places like Maxville, you needed to work side by side with that man because he may save your life. He may be the one that yells timber or gets you in a safe place or carries you to a safe place when you're in danger. So you let go of skin color. You let go of customs that you don't agree with or don't share to do the work and to do the job or to bring down that game so that everyone is fed for the winter. And there's some things that are just really set aside and people thrive. And I think that those are the stories that are really important to tell.
You can see an Oregon Experience documentary focused on Gwen Trice called The Logger's Daughter and find more coverage of Maxville at opb.org. And there's a new exhibit about Maxville at the Patricia Resource Center for the Arts on the Oregon State University campus in Corvallis, opening February 27, 2026. We'll have links in our show notes. And keep your eye on our podcast feed in the months to come for more stories about what archaeology can tell us about the history of rural Oregon communities. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Layla Isbell engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Weng. Eric Kane, Gwen Trice, Randy Layton, Terrence Connery, Greg Bond, Nick Fisher, Dave Miller, and Dave Blanchard did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.